Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping straight into something fundamental to modern finance: data. It really powers everything, doesn't it? From understanding customers to integrating AI.
Absolutely, it's the engine. But, using raw, real data, it carries some serious weight. Privacy issues, for one, information overload, and frankly, the potential for harm if it's not handled right.
Yeah, those challenges can actually stifle innovation, can't they? Put the brakes on things.
They really can.
So what if you could have the analytical power, that insight, but without the risky bets? That's where synthetic data comes in.
Exactly. Think of it as artificial data, carefully made to mimic the statistical patterns of real data.
And this is the crucial part, it leaves out these sensitive, private details from the original source.
Precisely. It's about unlocking value, driving innovation, developing models, but doing it safely, maintaining privacy, building public trust.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To explore the really critical governance side of generating and using synthetic data, specifically in financial services.
We're drawing heavily on the latest report from the Financial Conduct Authority's Synthetic Data Expert Group, the SDEG. It just came out, August 2025.
And this isn't just theory, is it? It's based on their actual practical experience.
That's right. The SDEG members, they're from industry, academia, the public sector. They've been wrestling with this stuff.
Good context to have. The
Yeah.
SDG itself, set up by the FCA back in March 2023.
Yep, 21 members. And this report we're looking at, it's their second publication, their final one.
So, important for you listening,
Mhm.
this report is a practical guide. Helps understand opportunities, challenges, but it's not the FCA's official view.
No, definitely not. And it doesn't automatically mean you're compliant with UK data protection law just by following it. It's expert guidance based on experience.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Synthetic data, what is it fundamentally? Why is it such a big deal for finance?
Well, at its core, it's artificial data. It doesn't link back to any real person or event.
But it behaves like real data.
Exactly. Statistically, it mirrors the patterns, the relationships, the distributions you'd find in a genuine data set.
But crucially, without the private or sensitive info.
That's the key. It achieves the statistical similarity without carrying over that identifying information.
That is powerful. So you can experiment, build models, innovate, almost like using live data, but without the same level of privacy risk or regulatory hoops.
Pretty much. It opens up a lot of possibilities.
So what's the FCA's story with this? How do they get involved?
They've actually been quite forward-thinking on this. It started back in August 2020 with something called a data sprint.
A data sprint. Okay.
Yeah, basically exploring the potential. And that led pretty quickly to the Digital Sandbox pilot.
Right, I remember that. Ran for a few months, late 2020 into early 2021.
Exactly. Testing the waters, seeing how tech like this could foster innovation, but securely.
And they obviously liked what they saw because the digital sandbox became permanent in August 2023.
It did. It signaled a real commitment. And their approach since has been sort of twofold. On one hand, developing practical proofs of concept, like the Anti-Money Laundering and Synthetic Data Project.
Ah, yeah, the collaboration with the Alan Turing Institute, Plenitude, Napier AI.
That's the one. Exploring how synthetic data could, really help in areas like AML.
And the other side of the coin.
Thought leadership. Which brings us back to groups like the SDEG.
Right. And this is where it gets interesting, because you said there weren't specific rules for synthetic data governance.
No, not really. So the SDEG had to build from the ground up, in a way.
How did they do that? Where did they start?
Well, they looked at what was already established and, frankly, stress-tested in finance, things like data and AI ethics framework.
Okay, makes sense.
And maybe even more importantly, model risk management frameworks, MRM.
Ah, like the PRA's MRM principles from 2023. Those kinds of guidelines.
Exactly those. They provide a really strong theoretical foundation, proven principles.
So from the data and AI ethics side, they're pulling ideas like transparency, fairness, privacy, especially with sensitive data.
Yep. Making sure the synthetic data itself is accurate, as unbiased as possible, secure, avoiding harm.
And from MRM, what comes from that world?
Things like rigorous model validation, understanding the limitations of your models, and having clear accountability for the outcomes.
And those apply directly if you train a model on synthetic data, right?
Absolutely. Whether it's fully synthetic or a mix, it's a natural fit.
So using these existing frameworks, plus the government's broader AI principles, the SDEG came up with 9 guiding principles for firms.
That's right. 9 key areas to consider.
Now, rather than just list them all, let's maybe zoom in on a couple that seem particularly crucial in practice. What's one that maybe sounds basic but is easy to get wrong?
I'd probably say accountability. Having those clear structures, documenting who's responsible for what, especially tricky when you bring in third-party providers.
Right. Knowing who owns the risk, who makes the call.
Exactly. And another one I think is vital is suitability.
Suitability.
Yeah.
Meaning,
Is synthetic data really the best tool for this specific problem? Is the use case justified? Are we realistic about what the tech can actually do right now?
so it's that just because you can doesn't mean you should idea. Is it the right fit?
Precisely. Don't
Yeah.
use it just because it's new and shiny. Make sure it solves a real need effectively.
Good point. And maybe one more. Given how fast things change, what about continuous monitoring and improvement? How's that different from just doing an audit now and then?
It's about it being ongoing. Regularly checking if the models, the data, the whole system, is it still working as intended? Is it still compliant, still fit for purpose?
Because the methods evolve, the risks evolve.
Exactly. You can't just set it and forget it. It needs constant vigilance. These principles, they really lay the groundwork.
Okay, so setting the stage.
Yeah.
Before a firm even generates its first synthetic data set, what groundwork needs to be laid? What's this governance and strategic readiness look like in practice?
It's about having your house in order, basically. 3 main pillars. First, frameworks, controls, and processes.
Meaning internal rules, checks, ways to escalate issues?
Yeah, exactly. Internal forums, clear guardrails, knowing who to go to if there's a problem. Second, roles and responsibilities. Crystal clear who does what, who owns what across any synthetic data project.
No ambiguity.
None. And third, documentation and continuous monitoring. Keeping detailed, transparent records of everything. Every decision, every test, every outcome, from start to finish.
If you don't have those, you're building on shaky ground.
Pretty much, yeah. Building on sand.
So foundational structures in place. What about the next step? Asking if synthetic data is even the right solution for a particular need. How do you weigh that up?
That's a crucial strategic check. You absolutely must start by defining clear, measurable objectives. What are you actually trying to achieve with synthetic data?
So you know if it's the right tool and it guides the technical choices.
Precisely. Does it align with the business need? Then you need a structured risk assessment. Formal processes to evaluate the inevitable trade-offs.
Like privacy versus utility, how accurate it is versus how private.
Exactly that kind of thing. Using tools like data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, and really thorough scenario testing helps make those trade-offs explicit and documented.
Okay, makes sense. But then there's the legal and ethical side. Compliance. Where does that fit in right at the start? What's the first call for a compliance team?
The absolute first thing is data protection and privacy compliance. If personal data is anywhere near the generation process or even used later downstream, this is non-negotiable.
So thinking about legal basis, data minimization.
All of that. And critically, testing for re-identification risks. Can someone potentially link this synthetic data back to a real person? You have to bake in data protection by design and default.
And beyond the strict letter of the law, what about fairness? Bias. That's huge in finance.
Hugely important and complex. It's about fairness, bias, and non-discrimination. You need to proactively look for bias in the original data and then assess how the synthetic generation process itself might affect it.
Could it accidentally amplify existing biases?
It absolutely could, or perpetuate them. And in finance, think about credit scoring, fraud detection. The impact is direct. So the Equality Act 2010, the FCA's consumer duty, they're directly relevant here.
It's about fair outcomes, aren't just legal minimums.
Exactly. And considering the broader ethical societal impact, aiming for neutral or positive outcomes through transparency and accountability.
So how do firms ensure there's proper oversight for all this?
It ties back to aligning with internal data policies, keeping meticulous audit trails, and being ready to demonstrate how you're meeting these obligations. The key action for anyone listening.
Yes.
Get your compliance, legal, data ethics, AI ethics, risk teams involved early.
Yeah.
Right at the planning stage, and document everything, especially the outcomes of those reviews. That sets your compliance baseline.
Sounds like choosing how you generate the synthetic data isn't just a techie decision either. It involves balancing act.
Oh, absolutely. You've got a range of methods, advanced stuff like generative adversarial networks, GNNs, agent-based models, even simpler non-AI statistical methods.
And the choice impacts everything. Fidelity, utility, privacy.
Directly. There are always trade-offs. Push too hard for perfect fidelity, you might increase privacy risks. Over-optimize for privacy, maybe the data isn't useful enough.
So how do you choose?
We really recommend using something like comparison matrices, systematically scoring different techniques against the factors that matter for your use case: privacy, utility, computational cost, regulatory fit.
Makes the trade-offs visible.
Exactly. And underlying all these choices is the need for stakeholder alignment. Synthetic data isn't just an IT project.
No, it needs everyone involved. Tech, legal, compliance, the business side.
Absolutely. It's inherently multidisciplinary. Looking at your existing governance helps you see if you're governance ready and where you might need to adapt for these complex projects.
Okay, let's talk about the build phase. Generating the data. Auditability seems key for trust, especially with synthetic data where there are judgment calls. How do you create that unbroken chain of evidence?
Yeah, that's fundamental. You need a clear, unbroken record of every decision, every transformation, every validation test. From the moment you consider the source data, right through to deployment.
They even start structuring that.
It begins with establishing ownership and use models. Who owns this synthetic data set? Who is responsible for its maintenance, its quality? Clarity here is vital for provenance.
Are there different ways to structure that ownership?
Sure. You might see distributed ownership where different teams share responsibility, or maybe vendor-specific ownership if you're using a third-party tool. Clear contracts are key there. Or even usage-based rights where access is tied to a specific purpose, maybe even for a limited time.
Okay, ownership clear. Then what? Governance isn't just a setup task, right?
Definitely not. It's about continuous governance stages.
Yeah.
Think of key checkpoints throughout the life cycle.
Like?
Data collection and pre-processing, ensuring the source data is sound. Then synthetic data generation and validation, benchmarking quality, doing those privacy checks. And finally, model training, testing, and deployment.
So like quality gates.
Exactly. Using stage gates at critical transitions, say, moving from design to testing or testing into production ensures things meet predefined criteria before moving on.
But documenting all this manually sounds like a nightmare, prone to errors.
It would be. That's why leveraging metadata and tools is crucial. Manual logs are risky. You need tools for things like provenance tracking, data version control, maybe MLflow reproducibility for machine learning aspects.
So the tools track the what, when, how.
Precisely. And rich metadata is the why. It needs to capture the original purpose of the dataset, the ownership, the generation methods used, and the rationale, and critically, any known limitations. Automation and good tooling are essential for robust auditability.
Now, we've said synthetic data reduces privacy risks, but doesn't eliminate them.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. How do you get your head around those remaining risks and test for them effectively?
Yeah, the risk profile changes. It doesn't vanish. So first step is understanding privacy risks properly. We need to classify them.
Based on what?
Several things. The generation method, some methods inherently carry more risk if they replicate patterns too closely. The intended end purpose and the trade-offs you made, did you prioritize utility over maximum privacy?
Right.
The data consumption environment, is it staying internal or being shared? And use case specific risks, are you dealing with super sensitive financial data? Or could someone reverse engineer trade secrets? Good documentation, like those DPIAs we mentioned, is vital here.
Okay, so you understand the potential risks. How do you test for them? Is there one magic metric?
Unfortunately, no. There's no single universal privacy score. So you need a suite of techniques for privacy testing for robustness.
Such as?
Things like red teaming or adversarial testing. Basically trying to break it, simulating attacks like membership inference to see if you can figure out if a specific real person's data influenced the synthetic set.
Actively trying to re-identify.
Exactly. You also combine different metrics, maybe K-anonymity or L-diversity to protect against outliers. And aggregate risk analysis, looking for ways to link the synthetic data to external information.
What about adding noise? Like differential privacy?
That's another tool in the box, yes. Introducing carefully calibrated noise can obscure details if re-identification is a real concern. And it's a big fix, but it usually impacts the data's utility and fidelity. There's that trade-off again.
And it's not a one-off test.
Absolutely not. Continuous monitoring and periodic reassessment are key. The threats and techniques evolve.
Let's switch to bias. All data has some bias, not always like you need bias to spot fraud. But synthetic data seems unique. You could intentionally fix harmful bias or accidentally make it worse. How do firms navigate that?
It requires a really careful, holistic approach across the whole life cycle, starting with identifying bias in source data.
Digging into where the original data came from.
Yes, its provenance. Looking for sampling bias, are certain groups underrepresented, overrepresented,
Yeah.
and understanding the problem framing, are there features like postcode or salary band that might act as proxies for sensitive characteristics?
Like race or gender.
Potentially, yes. Doing formal bias audits on the source data helps quantify this, check representativeness, track those potential proxies.
Okay, so you understand the bias in the source. What then? When you're generating the synthetic data.
This is bias manipulation during generation. It's a strategic choice point. You might observe and accept the existing bias if it's appropriate and not harmful downstream, or you actively mitigate it. Try to remove or reduce historical biases, say, those affecting certain communities. Or sometimes you might even introduce controlled bias,
Introduce bias, why?
maybe to better represent rare events for a specific task, like boosting the number of certain fraud examples to train a better detection model.
Ah, okay. Strategic amplification.
Exactly. And if you're using agent-based models, you have to scrutinize the built-in behavioral assumptions. Those can easily bake in biases. The absolute key here is to document the trade-offs you're making, bias versus fidelity versus utility, and set clear bias objectives.
So everyone knows what you were trying to achieve regarding bias.
Yeah.
How do you then measure if you succeeded?
Measuring and testing for bias in synthetic data is tricky. Again, no single magic test. It's a mix of quantitative methods using fairness metrics like demographic parity or disparate impact to compare outcomes across groups.
And qualitative.
Yes, absolutely essential. Bringing in qualitative insights from subject matter experts who understand the context.
And this isn't just a final check either.
No way. Iterative bias management is crucial. It's a continuous cycle. Test as you go, use feedback loops. If a model trained on the synthetic data performs poorly in the real world, maybe that points back to a bias issue in the data.
Get different eyes on it.
Definitely. Cross-functional reviews with legal, compliance, risk, ethics experts are vital. And detailed documentation, the bias specification, the measurement techniques, the rationale for decisions is non-negotiable for transparency and accountability.
So you've generated the data, navigated privacy and bias. Now you need to use it. How do you ensure the synthetic data is actually good enough for the ML models or analytics you want to run? How do you assess that quality?
Right. Is it fit for purpose? The key thing to remember is that quality is relative to the end application. It's not an absolute measure.
So where do you start the assessment?
A common first step is a high-level statistical comparison. Look at basic distributions, univariate, multivariate check correlations. It's relatively quick, computationally cheap.
Right.
But it often misses the deeper, more complex relationships, especially in high-dimensional financial data. It's a useful sniff test, but usually not sufficient on its own.
So you need something more robust.
Yes, you really need model-driven evaluation techniques. These actually use machine learning models to test the synthetic data's quality.
How does that work?
Two main approaches here: performance benchmarking and something called train synthetic test real, or TSTR. The basic idea is if a model behaves similarly, whether it's using synthetic or real data, that suggests the synthetic data captured the important stuff.
Okay, tell me about performance benchmarking.
You train a model on synthetic data, test it on synthetic data, get your metrics, accuracy, precision, whatever. Then you compare those metrics to a baseline model trained and tested purely on real data.
And big differences are a red flag.
Exactly. Signals potential quality issues. But be careful here. Watch out for things like data leakage or overfitting to the synthetic data, which could make the performance look artificially good.
Right. What about the other one? TSTR, train synthetic test real.
This one often gives a more direct measure of utility. You train your ML model only on the synthetic data,
Okay.
but then you test its performance on real data. This shows how well the knowledge learned from the synthetic data actually generalizes to the real world.
That sounds very practical. Any pitfalls there?
Yes, you can still get misleading results. Maybe the real test data you're using is biased itself. Or maybe the synthetic data just didn't capture certain crucial real-world interactions correctly. So again, careful interpretation is needed. And none of this is a one-shot deal. Evaluating quality needs iterative refinement. The performance of the models using the synthetic data should feed back into how you generate the data next time.
A continuous loop.
Exactly. Constantly tweaking that balance between fidelity, utility, and performance for the specific task. Structured feedback loops and clear documentation are vital for making this work effectively.
We mentioned earlier that synthetic data is often created with a specific goal,
Mm-hmm.
maybe enhancing privacy or maybe mitigating bias. How does that initial objective influence how the downstream model actually learns and performs?
It has a huge influence. The impact really depends on, well, the model's purpose, what those specific objectives for using synthetic data were, and crucially, the composition of the data set.
Composition meaning fully synthetic versus a mix.
Exactly. And the proportions. Dataset composition and proportions matter a lot.
How so?
Well, if synthetic data makes up, say, 90% of your training set, the model might start learning artifacts of the generation process itself, rather than genuine real-world patterns.
So it might miss edge cases or learn correlations that are out of date.
Precisely. Now, for the training dataset mixed by use case, synthetic data can be brilliant for augmenting small datasets, like in fraud, where you have few examples of real fraud.
Boosting the signal.
Right. But if you augment too much, you risk overfitting to those synthetic examples. And then there's alignment across datasets. If your synthetic training data isn't well aligned with your real validation or testing data, your performance metrics can be way off.
And you also mentioned a subtle re-identification risk when mixing.
Yes, combining synthetic and real data needs care, as it could potentially offer clues to de-anonymize the synthetic portion in some scenarios.
So how do you actually diagnose these impacts on the model? What tools can you use?
We need diagnostic tools for model impact. Performance benchmarking, which we discussed for quality, can also help here. Are the metrics weirdly inflated? That might indicate reliance on synthetic artifacts.
And TSTR.
TSTR is great for seeing if the synthetic training leads to misleading performance signals or maybe behavioral drift when the model hits the real world.
But what about understanding why the model behaves differently?
That's where explainability and feature sensitivity come in. This is critical. You compare models trained on real versus synthetic data. How does feature importance change? How sensitive is the model to different inputs?
And disparities there point to problems.
They can signal fidelity issues, or maybe that bias mitigation efforts had unintended consequences. You absolutely need domain experts involved here to interpret these differences.
Give me an example.
Okay, say you use synthetic data to try and correct historical bias in credit scoring. Explainability tools might show if those corrections accidentally distorted other key predictive relationships, potentially undermining the model's overall trustworthiness or its practical usefulness.
Got it. So these tools together give you that complete picture, making sure your synthetic data fix doesn't create a different problem elsewhere.
Exactly. It ensures interventions don't introduce unforeseen risks.
So wrapping this up, it's undeniable synthetic data offers huge potential, innovation, better data access, stronger privacy and finance. But actually getting those benefits seems to boil down to one word: confidence.
Absolutely. Confidence that the data is high quality, that it's safe, that it's suitable for the job.
And building that confidence, as we've heard, isn't just a tech problem.
No, it's fundamentally a governance challenge. It needs that clear ownership, the thorough documentation, real collaboration across disciplines, and those robust validation steps we talked about.
Confidence comes from transparency, consistency.
And everyone understanding how this synthetic data interacts with the wider goals: ethical, operational, analytical.
And it's great seeing projects like the FCA's AML work, tackling the practicalities, feeding real-world learnings back into these governance ideas, bridging theory and practice.
Yeah, and transparency is just so key throughout. Being upfront about why you use synthetic data, how it was made, what safeguards are in place. That builds internal buy-in and crucial external trust.
So this deep dive, much like the SDEG report itself, it's really a starting point, isn't it? A foundation.
Definitely. The conversation needs to continue. Practitioners, developers, regulators, everyone needs to keep sharing best practices, keep learning as the field evolves.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener. As synthetic data becomes more and more integrated into finance, how might this fundamentally change what we even mean by trust in our digital financial world, especially when the data itself is becoming, well, less real?